The taste of ash still haunts me from when the first orbital bombardment began. They don't want you to know about the dreams that follow Exterminatus. The real horror isn't the death of billions. It's the one who survives to remember them all, night after night, in perfect detail. This is my testimony. I was Psyker-Adept Thane Valoris, attached to the 47th Cadian Shock Regiment during the purging of Maltheus Prime. 17 billion souls screamed as the virus bombs fell. The warp should have taken their psychic echoes into oblivion. Instead, something went wrong. The planet's death scream burned itself into my mind, and now I relive that day every time I close my eyes. You think that makes me mad, but you don't know what I've seen in those dreams. The same day, playing out exactly as before, except I remember. I remember them all, and I've started to notice things are changing. Chapter 1. The Last Transmission. The Voxcaster crackled with static as I adjusted the psychic dampeners around my temples. The familiar weight of the neural interface pressed against my skull, a constant reminder of my burden and my gift. Outside the command bunker, the sounds of war echoed across Maltheus Prime. Las fire crackling like angry insects, the thunder of artillery, and the inhuman howls of the corrupted. Psyker-Adept Valoris, report to Command Station 7 immediately. The voice of Colonel Brass cut through the interference, sharp and urgent as always. I'd been expecting this summons for the past 3 hours, though I couldn't explain why. The sensation wasn't prescience exactly, more like a memory of something that hadn't happened yet. I made my way through the reinforced corridors of Firebase Imperator, past wounded guardsmen receiving battlefield surgery and munitorium serfs hauling ammunition crates. The air tasted of promethium fumes and fear sweat. 3 weeks we'd been fighting on this Emperor-forsaken world, trying to contain what the Mechanicus called a localized heretical uprising. The truth was far worse. The corruption had spread too far, too fast. It wasn't just cultists we were fighting. The very ground beneath our feet was tainted. Plants grew in impossible colors. Water turned to ichor when blessed. And the dead sometimes stood up to fight again without any necromantic intervention. This wasn't chaos sorcery. This was something older, hungrier. Colonel Brass stood hunched over a tactical display when I entered the command bunker. His weathered face, marked by 40 years of Imperial service, bore new lines of exhaustion I hadn't seen that morning. Captain Meridian of the Ultramarines stood beside him, her blue ceramite scarred but unbroken. Lord Inquisitor Vex occupied the far corner, his bionic eyes glowing red in the dim light. "Thane," Colonel Brass said, without looking up from the hololith. "We need your assessment. How far has the psychic contamination spread?" I closed my eyes and extended my consciousness carefully, probing the psychic atmosphere of Maltheus Prime. The sensation was like dipping my hand into a pool of acid, immediately painful and wrong. The planet's collective unconscious writhed with alien hunger, dreams that belonged to no human mind, whispers in languages that predated mankind's exodus from terror. "It's everywhere, sir," I reported, opening my eyes. "The corruption isn't just in the population centers anymore. The planet itself is compromised. The psychic resonance suggests..." I paused, choosing my words carefully. The barrier between realms has been severely weakened. Whatever they were trying to summon, they've succeeded. Lord Inquisitor Vex stepped forward, his augmetic jaw clicking as he spoke. "How long until complete manifestation? At current progression rates? 72 hours, perhaps less. The entity, or entities, feeding on this world's psychic energy are growing stronger by the hour. Soon they won't need a physical anchor in our reality." Captain Meridian's bolt pistol remained holstered, but her hand rested on its grip. "My battle brothers have reported similar findings. The enemy's tactics have become increasingly coordinated, as if guided by a single intelligence. We've also detected massive energy buildups in the planetary core." Colonel Brass straightened, his decision already made. "Then we follow Protocol Omega. All forces withdraw to minimum safe distance. Lord Inquisitor, the authority is yours." Vex nodded grimly. Exterminatus extremis. Virus bombing followed by cyclonic torpedoes. We cannot allow this corruption to spread beyond Maltheus Prime. He activated his Vox bead. Fleet Command, this is Inquisitor Vex. Authorization Crimson 77. Initiate Exterminatus protocols. Full sterilization of target world. The response came immediately. Acknowledged, Lord Inquisitor. Virus bomber squadrons launching now. Estimated delivery in 4 hours, 17 minutes. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not fear, something else. A sense of profound wrongness, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. My lord, I said carefully, I recommend we maintain psychic monitoring throughout the bombardment. If the entities anchored to this world are as powerful as I believe, the death of an entire planet might what, Adept? Vex's bionic eyes focused on me with uncomfortable intensity. It might not be enough to contain them. It might make them stronger. The command bunker fell silent, except for the distant sound of gunfire. Outside, 17 billion human souls continued their daily lives, unaware that their world had just been condemned to death. Children played in the ruins of hab blocks. Mothers sang lullabies to infants who would never grow up. Fathers worked in manufactories that would be ash before the next sunrise. The decision is made, Vex said finally. Begin evacuation procedures for essential personnel. Colonel, prepare your men for immediate withdrawal. As the command staff dispersed to their duties, I remained at the tactical display, watching the hololith representation of Maltheus Prime. Beautiful in its way. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in eternal patterns. In 4 hours, it would be a lifeless rock. I'd participated in Exterminatus operations before. 3 times, in fact, each one a necessary sacrifice to prevent greater catastrophe. But something about this felt different. The psychic resonance was wrong, building to a crescendo that shouldn't be possible if the corruption was truly contained to this world. Captain Meridian approached as I stood lost in thought. Psyker, she said, her voice carrying the measured authority of the Ultramarines. You seem troubled by something beyond the obvious. The death scream, I said quietly. When 17 billion minds die simultaneously, the psychic shockwave can be considerable. Usually it dissipates harmlessly into the warp. But if there are entities already feeding on this world's psychic energy, you believe they might survive the Exterminatus? I believe they might be strengthened by it. I turned to face her, noting the way her hand instinctively moved toward her bolt pistol. Captain, has anyone considered what happens if we're wrong, if the corruption has already spread beyond this system, through means we don't understand? Her expression remained carefully neutral. The Inquisition has made its decision based on the best available intelligence. We serve the Emperor's will. Of course. I nodded, knowing better than to question Imperial doctrine openly. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects, she agreed. But I caught something in her eyes. A flicker of doubt she quickly suppressed. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of evacuation procedures and tactical preparation. I found myself assigned to the last transport off-world, my psychic abilities deemed necessary for monitoring the Exterminatus from orbit. As I boarded the Valkyrie gunship, I took one last look at Maltheus Prime's surface. From altitude, the corruption was clearly visible. Vast geometric patterns stretched across continents, carved into the very bedrock by millions of cultist hands. At their center, massive spires of black stone reached toward the sky like grasping fingers. The sight made my psychic senses recoil in disgust. Incoming transmission from Fleet Command, the pilot announced. Virus bombers have reached target altitude, beginning bombardment in 60 seconds. I strapped myself into the jump seat and activated my psychic hood's recording arrays. Whatever happened next, there would be a record. Through the transport's armored viewport, I could see the Imperial fleet hanging in the darkness, massive cathedral ships bristling with weapons, their Gothic architecture a stark contrast to the alien wrongness below. Virus deployment commencing, came the fleet vox. Life Eater Strain 77 confirmed, planetary sterilization in progress. From orbit, The virus bombs looked almost beautiful, bright streaks of light falling toward the planet's surface like shooting stars. But I knew what followed. The Life-Eater virus would consume every organic molecule on Maltheus Prime within hours, leaving only barren rock and twisted metal. Then the screaming began. Not audible screaming, psychic screaming. 17 billion human minds crying out in perfect unison as the virus tore through their bodies at the cellular level. The sound hit my consciousness like a physical blow, and even through my psychic dampeners, I could feel the death agony of an entire world. But underneath the human voices, I heard something else. Something vast and hungry, and impossibly old, laughing as it fed on the greatest psychic feast in recorded history. "My God, Emperor," I whispered, realizing the terrible truth too late. We hadn't destroyed the entities corrupting Maltheus Prime. We'd given them exactly what they wanted. Chapter 2. The First Dream. I awoke in my quarters aboard the strike cruiser Indomitable Will, with the taste of ash in my mouth and 17 billion voices echoing in my mind. The chronometer read 0347 hours, ship time. 6 hours since the Exterminatus of Maltheus Prime. 6 hours since I'd watched an entire world die from orbit. The dream had been so vivid, I could still feel the virus bombs falling, still hear the psychic death scream that had echoed across the system. But it wasn't just memory. In the dream, I'd been standing on Maltheus Prime's surface when the bombs fell, watching the Life-Eater virus consume everything around me, while I remained untouched, unable to die, forced to witness every detail of the planet's agony. I rolled out of my bunk and immediately regretted the sudden movement. My head felt like it had been split open with a chainsword. The psychic dampeners I wore constantly during waking hours couldn't function while I slept, leaving my mind vulnerable to the residual trauma of the Exterminatus. This was normal. Traumatic psychic events often caused vivid nightmares in sensitive individuals. What wasn't normal was the level of detail. In the dream, I'd known things I couldn't possibly know. The names of people I'd never met, the layout of cities I'd never visited, conversations that had taken place on the other side of the planet. I'd watched a mother named Serena hold her infant son Marcus as the virus took them both. I'd seen Manufactorum foreman Krask die at his workstation, calling out for his daughter Lydia. I'd witnessed the final moments of Archbishop Matthias as he led prayers in the Cathedral of the Golden Throne. 17 billion individual deaths, each one burned into my memory with perfect clarity. I stumbled to the small wash basin in my quarters and splashed cold water on my face. The man staring back at me from the polished metal mirror looked haggard. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under grey eyes, premature lines around a mouth that had seen too much horror. At 35, I looked 50. The price of peering into mankind's collective nightmares. A soft chime indicated an incoming Vox transmission. I activated the receiver, expecting orders or perhaps a debriefing request from Inquisitor Vex. Instead, I heard my own voice. The taste of ash still haunts me from when the first orbital bombardment began. They don't want you to know about the dreams that follow Exterminatus. The real horror isn't the death of billions. It's the one who survives to remember them all, night after night, in perfect detail. This is my testimony. The transmission cut off, leaving me staring at the silent Voxcaster in growing horror. I'd never made that recording. I'd never spoken those words. But the voice was unmistakably mine. Same inflection, same accent acquired during my youth on Cadia, even the same slight rasp from an old throat wound. I checked the transmission logs. No incoming signals in the past 8 hours. The Voxcaster's memory banks showed no record of the message I'd just heard. Computer, run full diagnostic on Vox communication systems. Diagnostic complete. All systems functioning within normal parameters. No anomalies detected. I sat heavily on my bunk, trying to process what had just happened. Psychic trauma could cause hallucinations, but auditory manifestations were rare, and the content of the message, It referenced things that hadn't happened yet. Dreams that followed Exterminatus, nights of repeated memories. I'd experienced one nightmare, not a pattern. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Psyker-Adept Valoris. Lord Inquisitor Vex requires your immediate presence in the observation deck. I dressed quickly in my standard issue fatigues and made my way through the ship's corridors. The Indomitable Will was an ancient vessel, her hull blessed by the Mechanicus and inscribed with protective wards that made my psychic senses itch. Servitors shuffled past on unknown errands, their augmetic limbs clicking rhythmically against the deck plating. The observation deck offered a clear view of Maltheus Prime's remains. Where once a blue-green world had orbited its star, now only a blackened husk remained. The Life-Eater virus had done its work with terrifying efficiency. No green patches remained, no signs of water or atmosphere, just bare rock and the twisted remains of hive cities. Inquisitor Vex stood before the massive viewport, his black coat billowing slightly in the air recycler's breeze. Captain Meridian flanked him, her blue ceramite pristine despite the recent combat operations. Several other figures stood in the shadows, Adeptus Mechanicus representatives, Imperial Navy officers, and what looked like a librarian from the Blood Angels chapter. Ah, Valoris. Vex turned as I approached, his bionic eyes reflecting the dead world's pale light. Tell me, how do you feel? The question caught me off guard. Inquisitors rarely inquired about their subordinates' emotional states unless it affected mission performance. Troubled, my lord. The psychic resonance from the Exterminatus was significant. Indeed. And your dreams. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate controls. My lord. Don't dissemble, Adept. I can see the signs. Bloodshot eyes, trembling hands, that particular pallor that follows prophetic visions. You've been dreaming of Maltheus Prime. Yes, my lord. Post-traumatic manifestations are common after... These weren't trauma responses. Vex's voice cut through my explanation like a blade. Show him. Captain Meridian activated a hololith projector, and suddenly I was looking at a detailed scan of the dead world below. But this wasn't a standard Imperial survey. The display showed psychic energy readings, mapped in shades of red and gold across the planet's surface. These readings were taken 1 hour ago, the Blood Angels librarian said, stepping into the light. Brother Librarian Castiel, if I remembered correctly, a veteran of 2 centuries' service. The psychic resonance that should have dissipated after the planet's death has instead concentrated. I stared at the display in growing horror. The energy patterns formed a vast geometric shape across the planet's surface, centered on what had once been the primary hive city. And at the pattern's heart, a brilliant golden point pulsed with rhythmic intensity. It's alive, I whispered. More than alive, Vex corrected. It's growing stronger. Whatever entities were feeding on this world's population, the Exterminatus didn't destroy them. It gave them exactly what they needed. 17 billion souls, Brother Castiel added grimly. The largest single psychic event in recorded Imperial history. And something caught it all. I felt the pieces clicking together in my mind, forming a picture I desperately didn't want to see. The dreams, I said slowly. They're not dreams at all, are they? They're transmissions. Vex nodded approvingly. Very good. Yes, we believe the entity or entities on Maltheus Prime are somehow broadcasting the planet is death across psychic space. You're receiving those transmissions during sleep, when your mental defenses are lowered. But why? What purpose could it serve? That, Vex said, is what we intend to find out. You're being transferred to the Ordo Malleus research station on Kronos VII. There are others like you, Psykers, who've been receiving similar transmissions from various Exterminatus sites across the galaxy. Together, you'll help us understand what we're dealing with. The idea of other Psykers experiencing the same nightmares should have been reassuring. Instead, I felt a growing sense of dread. If this phenomenon was occurring galaxy-wide, affecting multiple Exterminatus sites. How many? I asked. 27 confirmed cases, Brother Castiel replied. 17 different worlds, all destroyed within the past decade, all showing similar post-Exterminatus psychic signatures. And the Psykers receiving these transmissions? Vex's expression darkened. 14 are dead. 8 are in various stages of catatonic withdrawal. You and 4 others remain functional. I stared out at the dead world below, watching that golden pulse at its heart grow brighter with each beat. Somewhere down there, something vast and hungry was feeding on the psychic echoes of 17 billion deaths. And somehow, it was reaching across space to plant those echoes in the minds of Imperial Psykers. There's something else, I said quietly. Earlier tonight, I received a Vox transmission, my own voice, speaking words I'd never said. It was warning about dreams that follow Exterminatus, about remembering them all, night after night. The observation deck fell silent, except for the distant hum of the ship's engines. Vex and the others exchanged glances that spoke of fears I wasn't yet privy to. How many times have you dreamed of Maltheus Prime? Vex asked carefully. Once. Last night was the first. But in your transmission you spoke of repeated dreams, multiple nights. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Yes. Valoris, Brother Castiel said gently. What's the last thing you remember before waking in your quarters tonight? I thought back, trying to recall the sequence of events. Boarding the transport, watching the virus bombs fall, the psychic scream, returning to the ship. Going to sleep after filing my initial report. Why? Vex activated a data slate and showed me the screen. My service record was displayed, showing recent activities and mission reports. According to the logs, I'd filed 6 identical reports about Maltheus Prime over the past 6 days. This is our 3rd conversation on this observation deck, Vex said quietly. You've been reliving the same day for nearly a week, Valoris, and each time, you remember a little more. The viewport showed the dead world turning slowly in space, that golden pulse growing brighter. 17 billion voices whispered in my memory, and for the first time, I understood what they were trying to tell me. I was trapped in the echo of their deaths, forced to experience their final day over and over again. And something on that dead world was making sure I remembered just enough to suffer, but not enough to break free. Emperor, preserve us, I whispered, watching my reflection in the viewport overlap with the image of the dying world below. In the reflection, my eyes were beginning to glow with the same golden light. Chapter 3. The pattern emerges. The Geller field fluctuated as we translated into the Kronos system, sending ripples of nausea through my enhanced consciousness. I gripped the arms of my passenger seat in the transport's cargo bay, fighting the familiar sensation of unreality that accompanied warp travel. But something was different this time. Beneath the usual disorientation, I felt a deeper wrongness, as if the very fabric of space around us had been stretched thin. Through the viewport, Kronos Sanvan appeared as a grey sphere hanging against the void, its surface dotted with the geometric patterns of Imperial installations. The Ordo Malleus research station occupied the planet's northern pole, a massive complex of laboratories, containment cells, and psychic isolation chambers designed to study the more esoteric threats facing humanity. "First time at a Malleus facility?" asked the woman sitting across from me. Psyker militant Seva Karoth wore the black carapace armor of a stormtrooper unit, her pale features marked by the distinctive scarification of a Mordia-born Psyker. According to her file, she'd been receiving transmissions from the Exterminatus of Tarsus Ultra for 3 months. "Yes," I replied, noting the way her hands trembled slightly, despite her controlled demeanor. "You?" "3rd time. I keep getting transferred here for psychological evaluation after each episode becomes more intense." She gestured toward the approaching planet. "Fair warning, the other survivors aren't exactly stable. Whatever's happening to us, it's getting worse." The transport touched down in a landing bay carved directly into the planet's bedrock. Armed guards in Ordo Malleus colors escorted us through corridors lined with psychic dampening fields and blessed silver. The air tasted of incense and ozone, with an underlying metallic tang that made my enhanced senses recoil. Inquisitor Vex met us at the security checkpoint, accompanied by a figure I didn't recognize, a hunched old man in Mechanicus robes, whose augmetic implants covered most of his visible flesh. Valoris, Karoth, welcome to Research Station Omicron 7. This is Magos Biologist Kane, our chief researcher on Project Oneros. The Mago stepped forward, his servo-skull companions orbiting his head in precise patterns. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat mechanical inflection of full vocal augmentation. Your timing is fortuitous. Subject 7 entered a new phase of manifestation 6 hours ago. We believe witnessing his condition may provide insight into your own predicament. We followed them through increasingly secured sections of the facility, past laboratories where hooded Adeptus Mechanicus adepts bent over arcane machinery and sealed chambers marked with warning runes. The psychic dampening fields grew stronger as we descended, making my head throb with each step. Subject 7 was the first survivor we identified, Inquisitor Vex explained as we walked. Psyker-Adept Maltheus Prime, formerly attached to the Cadian 15th. He began receiving transmissions from the Exterminatus of Herodian 4 8 months ago. Initially, the symptoms matched your own: vivid dreams, temporal displacement, gradual memory retention. What changed? Seva asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. He stopped sleeping, Magos Kane replied. 4 weeks ago, Subject 7 entered a state of continuous consciousness. He claims the transmissions are now arriving during waking hours, overlaying his perception of reality with scenes from the dead world. We stopped before a massive armored door marked with high Gothic warnings about psychic contamination. Through the reinforced window, I could see a figure sitting motionless in the center of a bare cell. Psyker-Adept Thane appeared to be in his 40s, but his hair had gone completely white, and his eyes glowed with the same golden light I'd seen in my reflection aboard the indomitable Will. Thane, Vex spoke into the Vox system. We have new arrivals. Can you hear me? The figure in the cell turned slowly toward the window. When he spoke, his voice carried impossible harmonics, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. They're not new, Inquisitor. I've seen them before, in the dreams of Herodian IV. Valoris died in the 3rd District during the virus bombing. Karoth led evacuation efforts until the very end. I felt ice in my veins. I'd never been to Herodian 4, never participated in its Exterminatus, but looking at Thane's glowing eyes, I could see images forming. A hive city consumed by viral flames, myself standing among the dying masses, Seva organizing desperate refugee columns as the sky burned above. How is he seeing events he never witnessed? I asked. That's the question, isn't it? Magos Kane adjusted one of his mechadendrite appendages, data streaming across the lenses covering his augmetic eyes. Our current hypothesis involves quantum entanglement at the psychic level. Each Exterminatus creates a massive disruption in local warp space. If the same entities are feeding on multiple events, they're creating a network, Seva finished, her scarred face pale. Using the death screams to link the sites together. Precisely. And psychers exposed to these transmissions become nodes in that network, living conduits for experiences that span multiple worlds and timelines. Thane stood and approached the window, pressing his hands against the reinforced glass. Where his palms touched, frost began to form despite the cell's regulated temperature. Show them the map, Inquisitor. Show them what we've really discovered. Vex led us to an adjacent observation chamber, where a massive hololith projector dominated the center of the room. With a gesture, he activated the display, and suddenly we were looking at a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Dozens of red points marked locations throughout Imperial space, connected by thin golden lines that pulsed with rhythmic energy. 27 confirmed Exterminatus sites showing anomalous psychic activity, Vex explained. But watch what happens when we plot the transmission patterns. The golden lines began to shift and reorganize, forming increasingly complex geometric patterns. As I watched, the seemingly random network resolved into something that made my enhanced consciousness recoil in horror. A vast ritual circle spanning half the galaxy, with each dead world serving as a focal point for energies beyond human comprehension. "It's a summoning," I whispered. "On a galactic scale," Vex confirmed. "Whatever entities are behind this have been orchestrating Exterminatus events for decades, perhaps centuries. Each dead world feeds power into a larger working that we're only beginning to understand." Siva studied the map with the analytical eye of a trained soldier. "The pattern isn't complete. There are gaps, sectors where they'd need additional focal points to finish the circle." "Indeed. Our xenoarchaeological teams have identified 17 systems that would complete the geometric requirements. All are currently facing various crises that typically precede Exterminatus authorization." I felt a sinking realization. "You're saying they're engineering the situations that force us to destroy worlds?" The evidence strongly suggests coordinated manipulation spanning multiple Imperial institutions, chaos cults appearing at precisely the right moments, Xenos invasions following predictable patterns, even inquisitorial investigations that lead inevitably to total planetary sterilization. Through the observation chamber's secondary window, I could see Caney in his cell, now standing with his arms outstretched, as if addressing an unseen congregation. Golden light poured from his eyes and mouth, and the frost on the window was spreading in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "He's translating again," Magos Kane noted, checking readings on his data slate. "The psychic resonance is increasing exponentially. If this follows previous patterns, he'll begin speaking in the voices of the dead within minutes." As if summoned by his words, Caney's voice changed, becoming higher, more desperate. "Please, the children are in the Eastern District. The evacuation shuttles can't reach them through the fires. Someone has to—" The voice cut off, replaced by another, deeper and more authoritative. "All units, fall back to secondary positions. The virus is spreading faster than projected. We have maybe an hour before." The voices began overlapping, dozens of individual speakers crying out in terror and desperation. But underneath the human voices, I heard something else, a vast, inhuman presence, speaking in a language that predated mankind's rise to the stars. The words were incomprehensible, but their meaning struck directly into my consciousness. "Soon, almost ready. The final harvests approach." "Shut it down," Seva said, backing away from the window. "Whatever's happening to him, shut it down now." "We can't," Vex replied grimly. "The process is self-sustaining. Once a Psyker reaches this stage, the only way to stop the transmissions is—" "Death," I finished. "We've tried. Caney has died 17 times in the past month. Each time the entities sustaining him restore his biological functions within minutes. He's become a permanent conduit for their communications. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Siva and I continued down the same path, we'd end up like Caney, trapped in an endless cycle of death and resurrection, forced to serve as mouthpieces for entities that fed on genocide." "There has to be another way," I said. "Some method of severing the connection before it becomes permanent." Magos Kane's augmetic features showed no emotion, but I caught a flicker of something in his remaining organic eye. "There is one possibility. Theoretical only, you understand. Extremely dangerous." "Explain." "The transmissions appear to be quantum entangled with the original Exterminatus events. If we could somehow reverse or interrupt that entanglement at the source—" "You're talking about traveling to one of the dead worlds," Seva said. "Physically entering a psychic maelstrom that's been feeding on billions of deaths." "The risks would be considerable," Vex admitted. "But given the alternative—" He gestured toward Caney, who was now speaking in what sounded like 17 different voices simultaneously, each one describing their final moments in excruciating detail. I closed my eyes and extended my psychic senses, feeling the familiar taste of ash and the whisper of distant voices. In my mind, I could see the network spread across the galaxy, golden threads connecting dead worlds in a pattern of unimaginable complexity. And at the network's heart, something vast and patient counted down to a moment of triumph that would reshape reality itself. "When do we leave?" I asked. Vex smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "As soon as we determine which dead world offers the best chance of survival. Because once we enter that psychic storm, there's no guarantee any of us will come back unchanged." Through the window, Caney suddenly fell silent. He turned toward us with those terrible glowing eyes and spoke in a voice that belonged to none of the dead. "The dreamers wake," he said. "The circle nears completion. Soon, the eternal feast begins, and death becomes only the first course." The lights in the observation chamber flickered, and for just a moment, I saw through Caney's eyes, saw myself standing in that cell, speaking those same words, while Inquisitor Vex watched from beyond unbreakable glass. The dream was becoming reality, and reality was becoming the dream. And somewhere in the space between them, 17 billion voices whispered my name. Chapter 4. Into the Heart of Death. The Dropship. Purgation's Edge translated out of warp space with a shudder that sent sympathetic tremors through my psychic consciousness. Through the reinforced viewport, Maltheus Prime appeared exactly as I remembered from my dreams. A blackened sphere wreathed in unnatural aurora that pulsed in rhythm with something deep within the planet's core. "Throne of Terror," whispered Saver from the acceleration couch beside me. It's worse than the recordings. She was right. The psychic emanations from the dead world were visible even to unaugmented human senses, ripples of golden energy that twisted and bent the light of distant stars. My enhanced perception could see far more. The geometric patterns carved into the planet's surface were glowing now, channeling power from the planet's molten core to feed the massive working that spanned half the galaxy. "Psychic resonance is off the scale," reported Brother Librarian Castiel from his position at the sensor station. "I'm reading energy signatures that should require the combined deaths of multiple star systems. How is a single world generating this much power?" Magos Biologist Kane answered without looking up from his cogitator banks. "The entity, or entities, anchored to Maltheus Prime are no longer bound by conventional thermodynamic limitations. They've achieved a state of perpetual energy generation by feeding on the temporal echoes of the planet's death." "Meaning they're reliving the Exterminatus over and over," I said, understanding finally dawning. "That's why the dreams repeat. We're not just receiving transmissions, we're experiencing fragments of a temporal loop. Indeed, each iteration of the planet's death feeds more power into the network, while simultaneously creating new connection points with susceptible psychers across the galaxy. It's an exponentially expanding system of psychic vampirism." Inquisitor Vex stood at the command lectern, his bionic eyes reflecting the unholy light from the world below. "Our mission parameters remain unchanged. We locate the source of the temporal distortion, plant the experimental Chronos mines, and retreat to minimum safe distance before detonation." "And if the mines don't work?" Siva asked. "Then we pray the Emperor's mercy is swift," Vex replied grimly. The Chronos mines were Kane's creation, experimental devices that theoretically could disrupt the quantum entanglement maintaining the temporal loop. Each mine contained a sliver of crystallized time, harvested from the Emperor's own throne room and blessed by the highest ranks of the Mechanicus. If detonated simultaneously at key points within the psychic network, they might sever Maltheus Prime's connection to the galactic summoning circle. "Beginning descent," announced the ship's pilot. "Emperor, protect us all." As we dropped through the planet's upper atmosphere, I felt the first tendrils of the temporal storm brush against my consciousness. Suddenly, I was experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously. Myself as a child on Cadia, training in the Scholar Psykana, dying in the 3rd district of Herodian IV, standing in Caney's cell, speaking words that belonged to the dead. "Focus, Valoris." Brother Castiel's voice cut through the temporal chaos. "Remember your training. You are here, Now, in this moment, let the other timelines pass through you without taking hold. I gritted my teeth and activated my psychic hood's stabilization matrices. The competing memories faded to a manageable whisper, but I could feel them pressing at the edges of my consciousness, waiting for any moment of weakness. The surface of Maltheus Prime was a nightmare landscape of fused glass and twisted metal. Where once 17 billion people had lived and worked and loved, now only empty monuments to destruction remained. But the most disturbing sight was the geometric patterns. Vast ritual circles carved into the bedrock itself, each one kilometers across and inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when observed directly. Landing coordinates confirmed, the pilot reported. Setting down at Site Primaris, the former location of Hive Majoris. The city that had once housed 40 million souls was now a crater filled with crystallized atmosphere and pools of liquefied metal that glowed with their own internal light. At the crater's center, a massive spire of black stone reached toward the sky, its surface covered in the same writhing symbols that marked the ritual circles. "That's our target," Vex announced as the dropship's engines cycled down. "The spire is the focal point for this world's contribution to the network. If we can disrupt its function with the Chronos mines..." The temporal loop breaks, and Maltheus Prime stops feeding power to the galactic summoning, I finished. "In theory," Kane added. "We have no practical data on the effects of Chronos weaponry against entities of this magnitude. As we disembarked from the transport, the full weight of the planet's psychic emanations hit me like a physical blow. 17 billion voices cried out in perfect unison, their death screams harmonizing in ways that shouldn't be possible for human vocal cords. But worse than the volume was the content. I could understand every word, experience every final moment, feel the exact sensation of the life-eater virus consuming flesh and bone and soul. "Stay close," Brother Castiel commanded, his force sword blazing with psychic fire. "The entities here feed on isolation and despair. As long as we maintain group cohesion, they cannot fully manifest." We made our way across the blasted landscape toward the black spire, our feet crunching on what had once been human bones fused into glass by the extreme temperatures of orbital bombardment. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something sweet and cloying that made my enhanced senses retch. "Movement," Seva reported, her hellgun trained on the shadows between ruined hab blocks. "Something large, keeping pace with us." I extended my psychic senses and immediately wished I hadn't. The shadows weren't empty. They were full of the dead, 17 billion souls twisted into new and horrible shapes by the entities feeding on their eternal torment. They watched us with eyes that burned like stars, their mouths open in perpetual screams of anguish and rage. "They can't fully manifest while the temporal loop remains stable," Kane explained, his servo skulls providing overlapping sensor sweeps. "But as we approach the spire, the local reality distortions will increase exponentially." As if to emphasize his point, the ground beneath our feet began to ripple like water. For a moment, I could see through the surface layer of fused glass to the pristine streets below, Hive Majoris, as it had been before the Exterminatus, filled with citizens going about their daily lives, unaware that their world was already condemned. A child ran past us, laughing as she chased a mechanical toy through streets that were simultaneously ruins and bustling thoroughfares. She looked up at me with eyes full of innocent joy and spoke in a voice like breaking glass. "You're too late, Psyker. The feast has already begun." The vision flickered and faded, leaving us alone among the ruins once more. But I could still hear the child's laughter echoing from the black spire ahead. "Temporal displacement is increasing," Vex observed, checking his chronometer. "We have perhaps 30 minutes before the reality distortions become too severe for safe operation." The spire loomed larger as we approached, its impossible geometry becoming more apparent with each step. The structure wasn't built. It had grown, extruded from the planet's core, by forces that operated outside conventional physics. The symbols covering its surface weren't carved. They were alive, writhing and pulsing with their own malevolent intelligence. There, Kane pointed to a series of crystalline formations at the spire's base. Those appear to be the primary resonance nodes. If we can position the Chronos mines at each node simultaneously, the temporal feedback should collapse the entire structure, I finished. But how do we coordinate the detonation across multiple timelines? We don't, Vex said simply. We trust in the Emperor's will and accept that some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. The first Chronos mine was roughly the size of a human head, its crystalline surface containing what looked like frozen starlight. As Kane began setting the device's temporal fuse, the air around us shimmered with possibility. I could see multiple versions of our mission playing out simultaneously, some ending in success, others in catastrophic failure. The entities are trying to fracture our timeline, Brother Castiel warned, his psychic hood blazing with defensive power. They're showing us potential futures to weaken our resolve. In one timeline, I saw myself transformed into something like Kane, a living conduit for the dead, speaking their final words for eternity. In another, I watched Seva consumed by the same psychic fire that had claimed so many others, her screams adding to the eternal chorus. In a third, I witnessed the spire's collapse trigger a chain reaction that destroyed not just Maltheus Prime, but every world connected to the network. First mine deployed, Kane reported. Moving to Node 2, the shadows around us grew deeper as we approached the second resonance node, and I could feel something vast stirring in the spaces between moments. The entity, or entities, responsible for this nightmare were finally taking notice of our presence. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. The wind through ruined buildings, the crackle of cooling metal, the whisper of dust across broken glass. "You come to break what cannot be broken," it said, "to silence what must be heard. The great work nears completion, and you are too few, too late, too weak to prevent what has already begun." "Keep working," Vex commanded, his bolt pistol trained on the shifting shadows. "Don't listen to its lies." But even as I helped Kane position the second Chronos mine, I could feel the truth of the entity's words settling into my consciousness like ice. We were too late. The network was too vast, too deeply rooted in the fabric of reality. Even if we succeeded in destroying Maltheus Prime, 26 other dead worlds would continue feeding power to the galactic summoning. "Third mine in position," Seva reported from across the spire's base. Temporal fuse armed and ready. As Kane activated the final Chronos mine, the Black Spire began to sing, a harmony composed of 17 billion voices raised in perfect unison. The sound bypassed my ears entirely, resonating directly in my soul with frequencies that spoke of endings and transformations beyond human comprehension. "Detonation in 60 seconds, Vex announced. "All personnel to minimum safe distance." But as we began our retreat, the ground beneath our feet cracked open, revealing the true horror beneath Maltheus Prime's surface. The planet's core wasn't molten rock. It was a vast brain, its neural pathways formed from the crystallized thoughts of the dead, its synapses firing with the memories of 17 billion final moments. And at its center, something that had once been human, but was now so much more, looked up at us with eyes like dying stars and smiled. "Welcome," it said in a voice that contained multitudes. "We've been waiting for you to arrive. In all the timelines, in all the possibilities, this moment always comes to pass. You plant your weapons, you make your desperate stand, and in the end, you become part of the feast." The Chronos mines detonated simultaneously, sending ripples of crystallized time cascading across the planet's surface. For a moment, the temporal loop shattered, and I experienced true, linear time for the first time in weeks. Then the entity laughed, and reality folded in on itself like origami made of suffering and despair. When my vision cleared, I was standing in my quarters aboard the indomitable Will, the taste of ash fresh in my mouth, and 17 billion voices echoing in my mind. The chronometer read E347 hours, ship time, and through my viewport, Maltheus Prime hung in space like a golden eye, watching me with patient hunger as it waited for the dream to begin again. Chapter 5. Breaking the Cycle. I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I sat at my small desk and began to write, documenting everything I could remember from the failed mission to Maltheus Prime. The Chronos mines, the Black Spire, the vast brain at the planet's core, all of it felt more real than the metal walls surrounding me. More real than the timestamp showing it was supposedly 6 hours after the Exterminatus, when I knew I'd already lived through weeks of subsequent events. The Voxcaster remained silent this time. No mysterious transmission of my own voice warning about repeated dreams. That, more than anything else, convinced me that something had changed. Some variable in the equation had shifted, even if the loop itself remained intact. I activated my personal cogitator and began cross-referencing the Imperial databases available aboard the ship. If the entities behind this network had been orchestrating Exterminatus events for decades, there would be patterns, subtle manipulations that led inevitably to planetary sterilization. What I found made my blood run cold. 17 of the 27 compromised worlds showed identical precursor events. Sudden chaos, cult activity, appearing exactly 3.7 years before Exterminatus authorization, always centered on specific geographic coordinates that would later become the ritual circle focal points. The coordination was too precise to be coincidence. Maltheus Prime followed the same pattern. The spontaneous uprising that had justified our intervention had begun exactly 3.7 years ago, initiated by a group calling themselves the Children of the Eternal Feast. Their manifesto, preserved in inquisitorial archives, contained geometric diagrams that matched the ritual circles carved into the planet's surface. But most disturbing was the final entry in the cult's records, a transmission received from an angel of transcendence, providing specific instructions for the uprising's timing and methodology. The transmission's psychic signature matched readings I'd taken from the Black Spire. The entities weren't just feeding on Exterminatus events, they were creating them. A soft knock interrupted my research. Valoris, Lord Inquisitor Vex requires your immediate presence in the observation deck. I checked my chronometer. 0617 hours. In previous loops, this meeting had taken place at 0630. Something was accelerating the timeline. When I reached the observation deck, I found Vex alone, staring out at Maltheus Prime's golden auroras. The planet seemed brighter than before, its psychic emanations visible even without enhanced senses. "You're early," he said without turning around. "You're earlier," I replied. "In the other loops, this conversation happens 13 minutes from now." He turned, studying my face with those cold, bionic eyes. "Other loops? Yes, I thought you might retain more memory this time. Tell me, how many iterations have you experienced?" The question caught me off guard. "You know about the temporal displacement?" "I've suspected since the second loop. Your behavior patterns showed too much coherence for standard post-traumatic stress. But I needed confirmation that the displacement was stable enough to exploit." "Exploit how?" Vex activated a hololith projector, displaying the same galactic map I'd seen at Research Station Omicron 7. But this version showed additional data, energy flow patterns that revealed the true scope of the network. "The entities orchestrating this have made one critical error," he explained. "They've created a closed temporal loop around Maltheus Prime to maximize its power output. But closed loops can be destabilized from within if you know the precise resonance frequency." I studied the data, my enhanced consciousness parsing the complex mathematical relationships between the dead worlds. "You're talking about sympathetic harmonic collapse, like using one tuning fork to shatter another." "Precisely. Each iteration of the loop generates specific psychic frequencies as 17 billion souls experience their deaths. If we can introduce a counter-frequency at the exact moment of maximum resonance, the entire network destabilizes." I felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by realization. But generating that kind of psychic interference would require a psyker of tremendous power. Someone willing to sacrifice themselves. Yes, someone who's already attuned to the network's frequency through repeated exposure. Someone who can channel the death screams of 17 billion souls and turn them back on their captors. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You want me to become a living psychic weapon. I want you to become humanity's salvation, Vex corrected. The loop has given you something no other Psyker possesses. Detailed knowledge of the exact moment when the planet's psychic resonance reaches critical mass. If you can position yourself at the network's focal point and channel a harmonic counter-frequency, I'll die. The psychic feedback from a galactic-scale network would burn out my mind instantly. Perhaps. Or perhaps your repeated exposure to the death echoes has given you the necessary resistance. Either way, the alternative is far worse. He gestured toward the viewport, where Maltheus Prime's auroras were growing brighter by the minute. The Great Working nears completion. Our xenoarchaeological teams estimate perhaps days before the entities achieve sufficient power for full manifestation. If that happens, they won't need dead worlds to anchor their presence in our reality. They'll be able to feed directly on living populations, consuming entire sectors without the inconvenience of engineered rebellions. I closed my eyes and extended my psychic senses, feeling the familiar weight of 17 billion deaths pressing against my consciousness. But this time, I pushed deeper, following the psychic threads that connected Maltheus Prime to the other dead worlds. What I found was a vast web of suffering spanning light years, each node pulsing with harvested agony as the entities prepared for something beyond imagination. How do I reach the focal point? I asked. The Black Spire. Its base contains the primary resonance chamber, the point where all psychic energy from the planet's death loop is channeled before transmission to the greater network. If you can reach that chamber during the exact moment of peak resonance. When does peak resonance occur? Vex consulted his data slate. In every loop, the maximum energy output occurs at 13:47 hours, 17 minutes, and 33 seconds. The moment when the virus bombs achieve global saturation and 17 billion minds cry out simultaneously. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. To reach the resonance chamber at the exact moment of peak psychic output, I'd have to be on Maltheus Prime's surface during the Exterminatus. I'd have to experience the planet's death firsthand, feeling every soul's agony as the Life-Eater virus consumed their bodies, while I fought to maintain enough coherence to channel that suffering into a weapon against its captors. There's another problem, I said. How do I get to the surface? In previous loops, all personnel are evacuated before the bombing begins. You don't evacuate. Vex's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing supply requisitions rather than my probable death. You remain on-world during the bombardment, using your psychic abilities to survive the initial viral release while making your way to the spire. The Life-Eater virus is specifically designed to kill Psykers. My abilities won't protect me from cellular dissolution. Perhaps not. But your connection to the network might. The entities have a vested interest in keeping their conduits alive. They may provide protection without realizing they're enabling their own destruction. It was a desperate plan based on hope and theoretical physics. But as I watched Maltheus Prime's unnatural auroras pulse with increasing intensity, I realized it might be humanity's only chance. If this works, I said slowly, if I succeed in destabilizing the network, what happens to the other Psykers connected to it? Caney and the others? Unknown. Best case scenario, they're freed from the entity's influence. Worst case, they die with me. I nodded, accepting the weight of that responsibility. How many lives is my conscience worth against 17 billion souls and the fate of the galaxy? That's a question only you can answer, Vex replied. But know that if you refuse, the loop will continue indefinitely. The entities will complete their great working, and humanity will face threats beyond our current comprehension. Through the viewport, I could see transport ships beginning their evacuation runs from Maltheus Prime's surface. In a few hours, the virus bombers would launch, and 17 billion people would die screaming. But this time, their deaths might serve a different purpose. I'll need access to the strongest psychic amplifiers available, I said. and whatever protective equipment you can spare. If I'm going to channel the death screams of an entire world, I'll need every advantage I can get. Vex smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Already prepared, Magos Kane has configured a portable psychic hood with harmonic resonance capabilities. It should allow you to maintain coherence long enough to reach the spire and broadcast the counter frequency. And if the plan fails, then you'll join 17 billion voices in an eternal scream, and the entities will have won a victory that spans the galaxy. He turned back to the viewport, watching the evacuation transports rise from the doomed world's surface. But if it succeeds, you'll have given humanity something precious, a future free from the influence of entities that feed on genocide. I remained on the observation deck for several more minutes, watching the last of the evacuation ships clear Maltheus Prime's atmosphere. Soon, I would board a stealth transport and return to the surface, positioning myself for the most desperate gambit in Imperial history. As I prepared to leave, the Voxcaster crackled to life with an incoming transmission, but this time the voice wasn't mine. "The dreams end here," said a familiar rasp. It was Kaney, speaking from his cell on Kronos 7 in a timeline that hadn't happened yet. "The feast is cancelled. Tell them we kept faith." The transmission cut off, leaving me alone with the weight of destiny and the knowledge that somewhere in the quantum maze of possibility, other versions of myself were making the same choice I was about to make. The taste of ash was already strong in my mouth as I made my way to the transport bay, but this time I was going to make it count. Chapter 6. The Final Descent, 2,300 words. The Stealth Transport. Whisper of Judgment cut through Maltheus Prime's upper atmosphere like a blade through silk, its hull blessed with void shielding that should theoretically protect against viral contamination. Should theoretically. The Mechanicus had never tested their equipment against life-eater strains in actual combat conditions. "Approaching drop coordinates," announced the pilot, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Emperor preserve us. The psychic resonance is off every scale we have." Through the transport's armored viewport, I could see the planet's surface spread out below like a map of hell. The great ritual circles carved into the continents glowed with increasing intensity as the moment of Exterminatus approached. At their center, the black spire rose like a needle threading through reality itself, its impossible geometry becoming more apparent as we descended. "Psychic amplifier online," reported Magos Kane from his position at the transport's technical station. The portable psychic hood he'd configured for me was a masterwork of archaeotech and desperate innovation. Crystalline resonance chambers powered by microfusion cells, neural interface cables that bypass normal human limitations, and at its heart, a fragment of blessed adamantium taken from the Emperor's own throne room. "Remember," Inquisitor Vex said as I made final preparations, "the harmonic counter-frequency must be broadcast at the exact moment of peak resonance. 1 second too early or too late, and the feedback will destroy you without affecting the network." I nodded, checking the chronometer strapped to my wrist. 13 or 12 hours. 35 minutes until the virus bombers reached target altitude. 36 minutes until 17 billion souls cried out in perfect unison, and I attempted to turn their death scream into a weapon against the entities that had orchestrated their suffering. "Target zone reached," the pilot announced, initiating drop sequence. The transport's bay doors opened, revealing a landscape that defied description. What had once been Hive Majoris was now a crystalline crater filled with structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The black spire at its center pulsed with rhythmic light, each pulse synchronized with what I knew were the final heartbeats of 40 million souls. I activated the grav chute and dropped into the nightmare below. The impact sent shockwaves through my enhanced consciousness as my boots touched ground that was simultaneously pristine ferrocrete and fused glass. Around me, the city existed in multiple temporal states. I could see citizens going about their daily lives overlaid with the ruins they would become, children playing in streets that were both whole and shattered. "Valoris report status," Vex's voice crackled through the vox bead in my ear. On target and mobile, I replied, beginning my approach to the spire. The temporal displacement is severe but manageable. I'm experiencing the city in at least 4 different time streams simultaneously. As I made my way through the shifting maze of possibility, I began to understand the true horror of what the entities had created. They weren't just feeding on the moment of death. They were harvesting every moment that led to it, trapping the entire timeline in an endless loop of suffering and despair. A woman materialized beside me, her face streaked with tears as she held the body of a small child. "Please," she begged, "help him. The sickness came so fast, and the Medicae said there was nothing." She flickered and became a charred skeleton, then shifted back to flesh, then became something in between. "Over and over," she whispered. "Always the same. Always too late." I forced myself to keep moving, pushing through crowds of people who were simultaneously alive and dead, healthy and corrupted, hopeful and despairing. Each step toward the spire brought new temporal layers into focus. I could see the cult uprising that had condemned this world, the inquisitorial investigation that followed, the moment when Exterminatus was authorized. 15 minutes to bombardment, Vex's voice reported. Virus bombers have reached final approach altitude. The spire loomed larger as I approached, its black surface covered in symbols that writhed like living things. At its base, the entrance to the resonance chamber gaped like a mouth filled with crystallized screams. But standing before that entrance was a figure I recognized. Myself, but changed, transformed by prolonged exposure to the network's influence. "You're too late," my doppelganger said, his eyes glowing with the same golden light I'd seen in Caney. "The great work is complete. The feast eternal has begun." "The bombers haven't even launched their payload yet," I replied, drawing closer to the chamber entrance. "Nothing is finished. Time is not a line here," the other me explained patiently. "It's a spiral, a wheel, a web of cause and effect that spans galaxies. What you call the future has already happened. What you call the past is still occurring. The entities you think you're fighting have been feeding on this moment for centuries." I could feel the truth of his words pressing against my consciousness. The network didn't just connect dead worlds across space, but across time as well. Every Exterminatus that had ever been authorized, every world that would ever be destroyed, all of it was happening simultaneously in the entity's expanded perception. "Then why are you trying to stop me?" I asked. "Because you need to understand what you're truly choosing," he replied. "The harmonic counter-frequency will destroy the network, yes. But it will also unravel every timeline connected to it. Every version of reality where these worlds died, every possibility where the entities succeeded, all of it will collapse into a single linear moment." The implications staggered me. Billions of alternate timelines, trillions of individual lives, all sacrificed to break the network's hold on reality. How many? Does it matter? The suffering exists whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether you have the will to end it. Above us, the sky began to change. Contrails marked the approach of the virus bombers, their payloads armed with life-eater strains that would consume every organic molecule on the planet within hours. In 10 minutes, 17 billion souls would begin their final scream. I stepped past my doppelganger and entered the resonance chamber. The space inside defied architectural logic, vast beyond measurement yet intimate as a confession booth, its walls covered in what looked like fossilized neural tissue that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. At the chamber's center, a crystalline formation rose from the floor like a tree made of compressed starlight. This was the focal point, the nexus where all psychic energy from Maltheus Prime's death loop was gathered before transmission to the galactic network. I approached the crystal and placed my hands on its surface. Immediately, my consciousness exploded outward, connecting to every other node in the network. I could feel the other dead worlds, sense the Psykers trapped in their own temporal loops, experience the vast hunger of the entities that fed on galactic-scale genocide. 8 minutes to payload release. Vex's voice seemed to come from very far away. I activated the portable psychic hood, feeling its crystalline resonance chambers sync with the focal point's energy patterns. The harmonic counter-frequency would need to be precise, a perfect inversion of the death scream's psychic signature, broadcast at the exact moment of maximum resonance. Through the network, I could sense the entities stirring, finally aware of my presence in their sanctum. When they spoke, their voices came from everywhere at once. The crystal, the walls, the spaces between atoms. "You understand nothing," they said. "We are not your enemies. We are your teachers, showing you the truth about existence, that suffering is the only constant, that death is the only certainty, that all life exists only to feed greater hungers." "Maybe," I replied, beginning the first phase of the harmonic sequence. "But that doesn't mean we have to accept it." "You would prefer the lie? The delusion that individual lives matter, that choice has meaning, that resistance achieves anything beyond delayed gratification." Around me, the chamber began to fill with images. Every world the entities had claimed, every soul they had consumed, every timeline they had collapsed in pursuit of their eternal feast. The scope of their hunger was beyond human comprehension, spanning not just galaxies, but entire cosmological epochs. 3 minutes to bombardment, Vex reported. Viral payload armed and ready. I could feel the 17 billion souls of Maltheus Prime holding their collective breath, suspended in the moment before their death. Their psychic presence pressed against my consciousness like a physical weight, each individual mind carrying its own hopes and fears and desperate desire to survive. "You cannot save them," the entities whispered. "You can only choose how they suffer, quickly and cleanly as part of our design, or slowly and agonizingly as you tear apart the fabric of causality itself." "There's a third option," I said, activating the second phase of the harmonic sequence. "I can give their deaths meaning." The chamber filled with golden light as the virus bombers released their payload. Far above, life-eater canisters tumbled through the atmosphere toward their targets, each one carrying death for millions. In moments, the screaming would begin. I reached for the crystal's core and began to channel not just the coming death scream, but every moment of joy and love and hope that had ever existed on Maltheus Prime. Every child's laugh, every lover's kiss, every act of courage in the face of impossible odds. If the entities wanted to feed on suffering, I would give them something else entirely. 1 minute to impact, Vex announced. The entity's presence in my mind became frantic, desperate. They had never encountered resistance like this, not fighting against the network's power, but redirecting it towards something they couldn't digest. 30 seconds. 17 billion hearts beat in unison, pumping blood that would soon be dissolved by viral agents designed to consume life at the cellular level. But for these final moments, they were still human, still capable of love and hope and defiance. 10 seconds. I opened my consciousness completely, becoming a conduit for every positive emotion that had ever existed on this doomed world. Joy flowed through me like liquid fire. Love burned in my veins like molten gold. Hope blazed in my mind like a star going nova. Impact. The virus bombs detonated across the planet's surface, releasing their lethal payload into atmosphere and water and soil. But instead of screaming, the 17 billion souls of Maltheus Prime sang, a harmony of gratitude and acceptance, and fierce, defiant joy that turned their death into celebration rather than suffering. The entities recoiled as if burned, their hunger transformed into nausea as they tried to feed on emotions they couldn't process. The network began to destabilize, harmonic frequencies cascading across space to shake the foundations of every dead world connected to the web. And in that moment of maximum resonance, I broadcast the counter-frequency, not the inversion of a scream, but the amplification of a song that spanned galaxies and spoke of humanity's refusal to surrender hope even in the face of cosmic horror. The crystal shattered, the chamber collapsed, the spire fell, and across the galaxy, 27 dead worlds went silent as their connection to the eternal feast was severed forever. I felt my consciousness scatter across infinite possibilities, each fragment experiencing a different outcome of our desperate gambit. In some timelines, I died with the network's collapse. In others, I survived to witness humanity's liberation from cosmic puppeteers. In all of them, 17 billion souls finally found peace. The taste of ash faded from my mouth, replaced by something sweeter. The flavor of victory earned through sacrifice, of hope maintained against impossible odds. The dream was ending. The nightmare was over. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, entities older than human civilization retreated to lick wounds inflicted by the one force they had never learned to consume. Love freely given in the face of certain death. Chapter 7. Echoes of Liberation. I awoke in the medical bay of the indomitable will to the sound of human voices. Real voices, speaking in linear time without the harmonic overlay of death screams. The taste in my mouth was clean water instead of ash, and when I opened my eyes, the chronometer read 21:47 hours, ship time. 14 hours had passed since the Exterminatus of Maltheus Prime. 14 hours in a single, unbroken timeline. He's conscious, someone announced, and I turned to see Apothecary Marin of the Ultramarines adjusting monitoring equipment beside my recovery bed. Vitals are stable, but the psychic trauma readings are off every scale we have. Inquisitor Vex appeared at the foot of my bed, his bionic eyes reflecting the medical bay's harsh lighting. For the first time since I'd known him, his expression showed something approaching relief. Valoris, how do you feel? I took careful inventory of my consciousness, testing the boundaries of my perception. The constant whisper of 17 billion voices was gone, replaced by the normal background psychic resonance of a ship's crew going about their duties. The temporal displacement that had trapped me in an endless loop of Maltheus Prime's death was absent, leaving only linear memory of events that had actually occurred. Free, I said finally. For the first time in how long was I actually trapped in the loop? From our perspective, 3 days. You disappeared from your quarters 47 hours ago. We found you in the primary cargo bay, catatonic but alive, clutching a crystal fragment that shouldn't exist according to current physics. Vex produced a small object from his coat, a shard of the resonance crystal from the Black Spire's heart, still glowing with faint internal light. Magos Kane believes this is a piece of crystallized time, somehow preserved from the network's collapse. It's been emitting harmonic frequencies that match the counter-signal you broadcast. What about the other worlds? The network? Gone, Vex confirmed. 27 dead worlds, simultaneously silent. Every psyker connected to the network has been freed from their temporal displacement. Kaney woke up on Kronos 7 6 hours ago, fully coherent for the first time in months. I felt a surge of relief so intense it was almost painful. Seva Karoth, the other survivors, all the psykers trapped in endless loops of trauma and death. They were free. The entities that had orchestrated galactic-scale genocide for their own feeding purposes had been severed from reality. Their grand design collapsed by the one thing they couldn't digest: voluntary sacrifice motivated by love rather than fear. There's more, Vex continued. Fleet Command has been analyzing the psychic disturbances across the galaxy. The silence from the dead worlds appears to be absolute. No residual emanations, no temporal echoes, nothing. Whatever you did, it was thorough. Apothecary Marin checked his instruments one final time before stepping back. Lord Inquisitor, his vitals are remarkable. For someone who experienced direct psychic contact with galactic-scale entities, there's virtually no trauma scarring. It's as if his consciousness was somehow protected during the process. I knew why. In those final moments in the resonance chamber, when I'd opened myself to channel the collective joy of 17 billion souls, I hadn't been alone. Every positive emotion, every act of love and courage and hope that had ever existed on Maltheus Prime had flowed through me, creating a psychic shield more powerful than any artificial protection. The entities couldn't harm what they couldn't understand. What happens now? I asked. Now we deal with the consequences, Vex replied grimly. The network's collapse has created some complications. He activated a hololith projector beside my bed, displaying a three-dimensional map of Imperial space. But this version looked different from the last one I'd seen. Instead of golden lines connecting dead worlds, there were now gaps in the psychic topology of the galaxy, empty spaces where the network's influence had been completely excised. The entities weren't just feeding on Exterminatus events, Vex explained. They were also manipulating the warp currents in those regions, keeping certain Xenos threats and chaos incursions contained through their presence. With the network gone, other things are moving into the vacuum, I finished, understanding the implications. We've traded one cosmic threat for potentially dozens of smaller ones. Precisely. Orc wars that had been mysteriously stalled for decades are suddenly mobile again. Dark Eldar raiding parties are probing systems that were previously avoided. And in 3 sectors, Chaos warbands are massing for what appears to be coordinated invasions. It was the eternal balance of the 41st millennium. Destroy one horror, and 2 more rise to take its place. But at least these were threats humanity could understand and fight, rather than cosmic puppeteers operating across timelines. On the positive side, Vex continued, the Ordo Malleus has gained invaluable intelligence about entity-class threats and their methods. Your experience has provided insights that will help us identify similar manipulation networks before they reach critical mass. A soft chime indicated an incoming Vox transmission. The medical bay's communication array activated, revealing the image of Magos Biologis Kane from Research Station Omicron 7. Lord Inquisitor, Kane's mechanically augmented voice carried an unusual note of excitement. I have urgent data regarding the network collapse. The implications are significant. Proceed. Magos, the harmonic counterfrequency broadcast by Psyker-Adept Valoris didn't just sever the entity's connection to our reality. It appears to have damaged their ability to manipulate temporal causality entirely. We're detecting resonance echoes from past Exterminatus events, suggesting that their previous manipulations are being retroactively undone. The implications staggered me. If the entity's temporal manipulations were being reversed, then the rebellions and crises they had orchestrated might never have occurred in the first place. Worlds that had been destroyed for engineered reasons might still exist in some alternate timeline that was now becoming the primary reality. How many worlds might be affected? Vex asked. Conservative estimates suggest 17 systems showing temporal flux patterns consistent with causal revision. If these worlds were destroyed due to entity manipulation rather than genuine threats, they might be restored. I sat up straighter in the medical bed, feeling the weight of possibility. The entities weren't just harvesting death, they were editing history itself to ensure those deaths occurred. With their influence removed, reality is reasserting its original configuration, Kane confirmed. Though the process appears to be gradual, taking place over months or years rather than instantaneous revision. Through the medical bay's viewport, I could see Maltheus Prime hanging in space, still dead, still blackened, but somehow less oppressive than before. The unnatural auroras that had marked its psychic emanations were gone, leaving only a normal, if lifeless, world. Will Maltheus Prime be restored? I asked. Unknown, Kane replied. The entity's hold on this particular world was maintained through active presence rather than temporal manipulation. Its death appears to be permanent within the current causal framework. So 17 billion souls would remain dead. Their sacrifice a permanent reminder of the price of victory against cosmic horror. But their deaths had meaning now, not as food for entities beyond comprehension, but as the catalyst that freed humanity from manipulation spanning centuries. There's one more thing, Vex said, deactivating the hololith. Your actions have attracted attention from the highest levels of the Imperium. The Emperor himself has taken notice of what occurred here. I felt my blood chill. Divine attention was rarely a blessing in the 41st millennium. What does that mean for me? It means you're being reassigned. Effective immediately, you're attached to a special task force under direct throne authority. Your mission will be to identify and neutralize similar entity-class threats before they can establish manipulation networks. A cosmic monster hunter, I said, accepting the weight of that responsibility. How many others? Initially, just you and the other 4 Psyker survivors from the network collapse. But as we identify additional threats, the task force will expand. You'll have access to resources that most Inquisitors can only dream of. Experimental weapons, archaeotech, even limited cooperation from Xenos species when dealing with mutual threats. The idea should have been exciting, unlimited authority to protect humanity from cosmic horrors, backed by the full resources of the Imperium. Instead, I felt a profound sense of loss. The simple certainty of my previous existence, the clear hierarchy of the Imperial Guard, the comfort of following orders rather than making decisions that affected entire sectors, all of that was gone now. "When do I start?" I asked. "As soon as you're medically cleared," Vex replied. "Though I suspect that won't take long. Your consciousness appears to have been fundamentally changed by exposure to the network, strengthened rather than damaged. Magos Kane believes you may now be immune to certain forms of psychic manipulation." I closed my eyes and extended my enhanced senses, feeling the familiar flow of psychic energy around me. But the taste was different now, cleaner, more focused, as if the 17 billion voices had left part of themselves behind to guide and protect me. I could sense threats that would have been invisible before, detect patterns of manipulation that spanned decades or centuries. "There's something else," I said, opening my eyes. The entities weren't working alone. The network was too sophisticated, too perfectly designed for galactic-scale manipulation. They had help. Vex's expression darkened. "Explain." In the resonance chamber, during the final moments before the network collapsed, I sensed other intelligences connected to the system. Not the hunger entities that were feeding on the death screams, but something else. Something that understood Imperial procedures well enough to engineer Exterminatus authorizations across multiple sectors. Human collaboration? Or something that could perfectly mimic human thought patterns. The manipulations were too precise, too specifically tailored to Imperial doctrine and inquisitorial psychology. Whoever designed the network understood us better than we understand ourselves. The implications hung in the air between us like a curse. The network was gone, the entity class threats neutralized, but their human collaborators, if that's what they were, remained at large. And now they knew their methods had been exposed. "Then our work is far from over," Vex said grimly, "but at least now we know what we're fighting." Through the viewport, Maltheus Prime completed another rotation, its dead surface reflecting the light of distant stars. 17 billion souls had bought humanity its freedom from cosmic manipulation, and their sacrifice would not be forgotten. But somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, other entities watched and waited, and the collaborators who had helped engineer humanity's near enslavement were already adapting their methods for the next attempt. The dream had ended, but the nightmare was far from over, and I was humanity's first line of defense against horrors that spanned space and time. The taste of ash was gone from my mouth, replaced by the clean, sharp flavor of purpose. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 8, The Guardian's Path. 3 months after the liberation of Maltheus Prime, I stood in the command center of Watch Station Eternus, studying hololithic displays that showed psychic disturbances across 17 sectors of Imperial space. The fortress monastery hung in the void between star systems, its ancient halls filled with the quiet purpose of humanity's newest defenders against cosmic horror. Anomalous. Readings confirmed in the Tartarus sector, reported Sevakareth from her position. At the sensor station, the scarred Psyker had adapted well to our new role, her Mordian discipline proving invaluable in organizing the intelligence. Networks we needed to identify entity class, threats before they could establish manipulation. Systems. Pattern analysis suggests early-stage network formation, added Psyker-Adept Chen Lin, one of the other survivors from the original network collapse. His expertise in xenoarchaeological psychometry had already helped us prevent 2 potential Exterminatus events that showed signs of entity manipulation. I approached the main display, my enhanced consciousness automatically passing the complex data streams that marked humanity's expanding understanding of cosmic threats. The taste in my mouth these days was different. Not the clean water of simple purpose, but something more complex. The flavor of responsibility measured in galactic scales. "Show me the temporal displacement readings," I commanded. The hololithic display shifted, revealing subtle distortions in local spacetime that would have been invisible to standard Imperial sensors. But our equipment had been upgraded with technology reverse-engineered from the crystal fragments recovered from Maltheus Prime, allowing us to detect entity influence before it reached critical mass. There, I pointed to a cluster of red indicators. Those aren't random anomalies. Someone's trying to establish causality loops around 3 different systems: Hector Prime, Valeria Station, and the Mordian shipyards. Strategic targets, Saver observed. Destroy Hector Prime, and you cut the primary supply line to the Cadian Gate. Valeria Station controls access to the Maelstrom's periphery, and the Mordian shipyards produce 60% of the Imperial Navy's heavy cruisers. I finished. Whoever's behind this new network understands Imperial logistics, as well as they understand our psychology. The evidence had been mounting for weeks, subtle manipulations appearing across the galaxy, all bearing the hallmarks of entity influence, but with a sophistication that suggested human guidance. Chaos cults appearing at precisely calculated intervals, Xenos incursions that forced Imperial responses along predictable patterns, even inquisitorial investigations that seemed designed to reach Exterminatus conclusions. "Sir," Chen-Lin announced from his station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Inquisitor Vex on Kronos the 7th. The main display shifted to show Vex's image, transmitted across the void through encrypted psychic relay. Behind him, I could see the familiar walls of Research Station Omicron 7, but something was different. Tension in his posture, urgency in his mechanical features. "Valoris," he said without preamble, "we've identified the source of the new manipulations. You're not going to like what we've found." "Show me." The transmission shifted to display a series of documents: internal inquisitorial communications, personnel files, transfer orders spanning decades. As I studied the data, a pattern emerged that made my enhanced consciousness recoil in horror. Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor Marcus Draven. Vex's voice continued over the documentation. 40 years of exemplary service, responsible for authorizing 17 Exterminatus events across his career. All 17 worlds are now confirmed to have been connected to the entity network. I studied Draven's service record, noting the precision with which his investigations had led to planetary sterilization. Always the same pattern: initial reports of minor heretical activity, escalating evidence of corruption, final authorization for total cleansing. Too clean, too predictable. "He's not the only one," Vex continued. "We've identified at least 12 other Inquisitors across multiple Ordos whose investigation patterns match entity manipulation protocols. Some have been active for over a century." The implications staggered me. The entities hadn't just influenced Imperial policy from outside. They'd infiltrated the Inquisition itself, placing their agents in positions where they could directly authorize the Exterminatus events that fed the network. How many worlds had been destroyed not because they were genuinely corrupted, but because entity-controlled Inquisitors needed to harvest their populations? "Are they willing collaborators or victims of entity influence?" I asked, unknown. "Psychic examination is complicated when dealing with Inquisitors of their experience level. They have mental defenses that could hide entity manipulation and the authority to refuse cooperation with our investigation. Where is Draven now? That's the problem. He disappeared from his last known location 48 hours ago, along with 3 companies of stormtroopers and a requisitioned strike cruiser. Our sources suggest he's heading toward the Tartarus sector, the same sector where we detected the early signs of new network formation. The pattern was clear. Draven and his fellow compromised Inquisitors were attempting to rebuild what we'd destroyed, creating a new manipulation network to replace the one that had been shattered at Maltheus Prime. "We need to intercept him before he reaches the target systems," I said, already calculating travel times and force deployments. "If he succeeds in establishing even a limited network, the entity influence could spread faster than before," Saver finished. "They know our detection methods now. They'll adapt." Chen-Lin looked up from his station, his young features marked by the premature aging that came with exposure to cosmic horrors. "Sir, I'm detecting massive warp disturbances in the Tartarus sector. Something big is happening." The main display shifted to show real-time psychic readings from our sensor network. What I saw made my blood run cold. Energy patterns that matched the early stages of Exterminatus authorization on 3 different worlds simultaneously. Draven wasn't just trying to rebuild the network. He was attempting to create multiple focal points at once, accelerating the process to achieve critical mass before we could intervene. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Based on historical patterns, perhaps 72 hours before the first Exterminatus authorization is issued," Chen-Lin reported. "Once that process begins, the entities will have their foothold back in our reality." I turned to address the command center's full crew. All stations, prepare for immediate departure. We're heading to Tartarus at maximum speed. As Watch Station Eternus's ancient engines fired to life, I found myself thinking about the weight of responsibility that had settled on my shoulders since Maltheus Prime. 3 months ago, I'd been a simple psyker attached to a guard regiment, following orders and trying to survive the galaxy's endless wars. Now I commanded resources that most planetary governors couldn't imagine, and my decisions affected the fate of entire star systems. "Sir," Seva approached as we entered the warp, her expression troubled. "There's something else about the compromised Inquisitors. I've been analyzing their psychological profiles, looking for common factors that might explain their susceptibility to entity influence." "What did you find?" "They're all true believers, fanatics, even by inquisitorial standards. Every one of them has a documented history of extreme methods in pursuit of imperial purity, the kind of people who would authorize Exterminatus without hesitation if they believed it served the Emperor's will." The implication was clear and disturbing. The entities hadn't chosen their inquisitorial agents randomly. They'd specifically targeted individuals whose genuine faith and devotion could be twisted into tools for genocide. The most pure in purpose had become the most corrupted in action. It's the perfect manipulation, I realized. They don't need to turn loyalists into traitors. They just need to convince fanatics that mass murder serves the Emperor. And given the Imperium's relationship with truth and information control, Seva added, it would be easy to provide false evidence that supports whatever conclusion they want their agents to reach. The warp journey to Tartarus would take 18 hours, time we desperately needed to prepare for a confrontation that would determine whether the entity network could be permanently destroyed or would rise again to threaten humanity across the galaxy. I made my way to the station's meditation chambers, where the crystal fragments from Maltheus Prime were housed in specially designed reliquaries. The shards still glowed with internal light, their crystallized time providing a connection to the moment when 17 billion souls had chosen love over fear in the face of cosmic horror. Placing my hands on the largest fragment, I extended my consciousness across space and time, feeling for the subtle distortions that marked entity influence. What I found was worse than I'd feared. The new network wasn't just rebuilding, it was evolving, learning from its previous defeat. The entities had studied the harmonic counterfrequency I'd used to destroy their original system. They were now designing their new network to be immune to similar attacks, with distributed nodes that could operate independently even if primary focal points were destroyed. But they'd made one critical error. In adapting their methods to counter my previous strategy, they'd revealed the true scope of their intelligence and planning capabilities. These weren't mindless hunger entities feeding on random suffering. They were sophisticated manipulators with long-term goals that spanned galactic timescales, and that meant they could be outmaneuvered by someone who understood their methods. "All hands, prepare for warp exit," announced the station's Vox system. Translation to normal space in 60 seconds. As Watch Station Eternus dropped back into reality at the edge of the Tartarus sector, I felt the familiar weight of destiny settling around my shoulders. 3 worlds hung in the balance, their populations unaware that their fate would be decided in the next few hours. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't fighting blind against an unknown enemy. I understood the entity's methods, knew their weaknesses, and had the resources to strike at their human agents before the network could be completed. The taste in my mouth was no longer ash or clean water, or even complex responsibility. It was something newer, harder, the flavor of a hunter who had finally learned to think like his prey. "Contact confirmed," reported the sensor station. "Strike cruiser Righteous Fury in orbit around Hector Prime, Inquisitor Draven's vessel. Signal all ships," I commanded. "We're going in fast and hard. The galaxy's future depends on what happens in the next few hours." Through the command center's viewports, I could see the distant glow of Hector Prime's star, its light carrying the hopes and fears of billions who didn't know their world had been targeted for extinction. But they had guardians now, humanity's first line of defense against cosmic horror. The real war was finally beginning, and this time we were ready. The strike cruiser Righteous Fury hung in Hector Prime's orbit like a predatory bird, its weapon arrays trained on the planet's surface in preparation for the orbital bombardment that would begin the entity network's reconstruction. Through Watch Station Eternus's enhanced sensors, I could detect the subtle psychic emanations already beginning to flow from the world. Below, 17 million souls unknowingly preparing to feed a cosmic hunger that spanned galaxies. Tactical. Analysis complete, reported Siva, her scarred features grim as she studied the hololithic displays. Draven has positioned his fleet assets at optimal bombardment coordinates. 3 heavy cruisers, 12 escorts, and enough virus bombs to sterilize the entire system. He's not taking any chances. I examined the fleet positioning with the analytical eye I'd developed during my months as humanity's cosmic monster hunter. The formation was textbook inquisitorial doctrine. Overwhelming force applied with surgical precision to eliminate threats before they could spread. But I could see the subtle variations that marked entity influence. The specific orbital positioning that would maximize psychic resonance during the planet's death. The timing sequences that would create harmonic frequencies matching the old network's specifications. He's following a script, I murmured, recognizing the patterns from my memories of Maltheus Prime. Every detail has been calculated to recreate the exact conditions that allowed the entities to harvest 17 billion souls. Lin looked up from his psychometric analysis station, his young features marked by the premature aging that came with prolonged exposure to cosmic horrors. Sir, I'm detecting temporal distortions around the righteous. Fury. Someone's already begun. Preliminary causality manipulation. They're trying to lock this timeline into inevitability. The implications sent ice through my veins. If Draven succeeded in establishing temporal locks around the Exterminatus authorization, any attempt to prevent the bombardment would simply create alternate timelines where it happened anyway. The entities would feed on every possible version of Hector Prime's death, gaining exponentially more power than a simple planetary harvest should provide. Signal the fleet, I commanded. All ships to battle stations. We're going in hard and fast before they can complete the temporal locks. As Watch Station Eternus's escort vessels moved into attack formation, I felt the familiar weight of command settling around my shoulders like a heavy cloak. 3 months of hunting cosmic horrors across the galaxy had taught me that victory often came at costs measured in entire star systems. But failure here would doom not just Hector Prime, but potentially every world the entities targeted for their rebuilt network. Incoming transmission from the Righteous Fury, announced the communications station. Inquisitor Draven is requesting parley under the seal of the Holy Ordos. Put him through. The main hololithic display shifted to show a figure I recognized from inquisitorial files. Inquisitor Marcus Draven, 40 years of exemplary service etched into features that spoke of absolute faith and unshakable purpose. But when he spoke, I could hear the subtle harmonics that marked entity influence underlying his words. Psyker-Adept Valoris, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. You will stand down immediately and withdraw your forces from this system. I am operating under direct authority from the High Lords of Terror. Show me the authorization codes, I replied, already knowing what I would find. Draven transmitted the documents. Genuine inquisitorial seals, legitimate authorization numbers, even biometric confirmations from Terra itself. But my enhanced consciousness could detect the temporal distortions woven through the data streams. These weren't forged documents. They were real authorizations from a timeline that hadn't happened yet, pulled back through causality manipulation to provide retroactive justification for actions already planned. The authorizations are real, Saver whispered, studying the data on secondary displays. How is that possible? Entity manipulation of spacetime, I explained, my understanding of cosmic horror deepening with each revelation. They're not just editing history, they're editing the future, creating authorization documents that won't be issued for months or years, then using temporal displacement to make them exist in the present. It was manipulation on a scale that beggared imagination. The entities weren't just influencing individual inquisitors, they were reaching across time itself to ensure their agents had the proper documentation for actions that served the network's goals. Valoris, Draven's voice cut through my analysis. You have 60 seconds to begin withdrawal, or I will classify your forces as heretical and respond accordingly. Through the tactical displays, I could see Draven's fleet moving into aggressive postures, weapon systems powering up as they prepared to engage. But something about their formation was wrong, too perfect, too precisely calculated for human tactical doctrine. The entity influence wasn't just providing authorization codes and psychological manipulation. It was directly guiding fleet maneuvers with superhuman precision. "Sir," Chen-Lin announced urgently, "massive psychic disturbance detected on Hector Prime's surface. Something's happening in the primary hive. City." The display shifted to show orbital reconnaissance of Hector Prime's capital, a sprawling metropolis housing 12 million souls, who went about their daily lives unaware that their world had been condemned. But at the city's heart, something was wrong. Geometric patterns were appearing in the streets themselves, carved into ferrocrete and metal by millions of hands moving in perfect synchronization. Mass psychic possession, Siva identified, her voice tight with horror. The entities are using the population to prepare the ritual circles needed for network integration. I watched 12 million people, men, women, children, elderly, all moving with inhuman coordination as they carved symbols that hurt to look at directly into the fabric of their own city. They worked with their bare hands, their fingernails, improvised tools, anything that could mark stone and metal. Blood flowed from thousands of wounds, but they didn't stop, couldn't stop, driven by a will that wasn't their own. "How long have they been working?" I asked. "Based on the pattern complexity, at least 18 hours. Chen-Lin reported after running calculations through the psychometric analyzers. "They must have begun the moment Draven entered the system. 18 hours of 12 million people carving ritual symbols into their own city, while Draven's fleet held orbit above them. The timeline was accelerating beyond anything we'd seen before. The entities had learned from their defeat at Maltheus Prime and were compressing months of preparation into days or hours. Valoris, Draven's transmission continued. "You're interfering with a sanctified inquisitorial operation. The corruption on Hector Prime has reached critical mass. Exterminatus is the only solution." "What corruption?" I demanded. "Show me evidence of heretical activity, xenos infiltration, or chaos manifestation." The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. There was no corruption on Hector Prime beyond what the entities themselves had introduced. The mass possession carving ritual symbols was both the evidence for Exterminatus and the preparation for harvesting the planet's death scream. "The evidence is classified," Draven finally replied. "My authority supersedes your clearance level." It was the perfect closed loop. Create the corruption that justified intervention. Use the intervention to harvest the planet's population. Use the harvest to power a network that would create more corruption. Each step provided justification for the next, and the entire cycle was protected by legitimate inquisitorial authority backed by temporal manipulation. "Sir," the tactical station reported, "Draven's escorts are moving to intercept our approach. He's not backing down." I studied the tactical display, calculating odds and analyzing force deployments with the enhanced consciousness that had been shaped by months of cosmic horror. Draven's fleet was larger and better armed, but they were operating under entity influence that prioritized specific outcomes over tactical flexibility. If I could force them into engagements that didn't match their prescribed objectives. "All ships, implement pattern Omega-7, I commanded. "We're going to break their formation and force them to fight like humans instead of cosmic puppets." Pattern Omega-7 was a battle doctrine I'd developed specifically for engaging entity-influenced forces. Instead of direct confrontation, it used rapid strikes and withdrawals to force enemy commanders to make independent tactical decisions. Entity influence worked best when following predetermined plans. Forcing improvisation often caused the manipulation to break down. The first phase went exactly as predicted. Our lead destroyers struck at Draven's screening vessels, then immediately withdrew before the heavier ships could respond. The entity-influenced fleet tried to maintain formation, but our second strike forced them to either abandon their prescribed positions or watch their escorts be destroyed one by one. Psychic resonance fluctuating around the righteous fury, Chen-Lin reported. The entity influence is destabilizing under tactical pressure. I could see it in the fleet's movement patterns. Moments of human decision-making breaking through the inhuman precision. Draven was fighting against the entity control, his genuine tactical experience conflicting with the predetermined battle plans burned into his consciousness. "Signal the righteous fury directly," I ordered. "Emergency inquisitorial override. Personal message to Draven." When the communication channel opened, I could see the strain in Draven's features, the telltale signs of someone fighting a mental battle on multiple fronts. His eyes still held the golden glow of entity influence, but underneath, I caught glimpses of genuine human confusion and distress. "Marcus," I said, using his first name deliberately to break through the formal authority structures the entities relied on. "How long have you been having the dreams?" The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Draven's entire body went rigid, his augmetic jaw clenching as competing influences warred for control of his consciousness. For just a moment, the golden glow faded from his eyes, replaced by very human fear and horror. 17 worlds, he whispered, his voice breaking. 17 worlds I condemned. They showed me evidence, provided documentation, gave me authority codes, but the dreams never stopped. Every night, I watched them all die, over and over. The evidence was fabricated, I told him gently. The authorization codes were pulled from potential futures. The entities have been using you to harvest entire populations for their feeding network. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Through the communication link, I could see tears streaming down his face as 40 years of absolute certainty crumbled into doubt and self-recrimination. But the entity influence wasn't gone. It was fighting back, trying to reassert control over a consciousness that was beginning to reject its presence. "No," Draven said, his voice taking on that familiar harmonic overlay. "The corruption is real. The threats are genuine. Hector Prime must be cleansed for the good of the Imperium." But even as he spoke the words, I could see him fighting against them. The tactical pressure we'd applied had created cracks in the entity manipulation, allowing his true personality to surface in moments of crisis. "Look at the surface," I urged him. "Use your own sensors, not the filtered data they've been feeding you. See what's actually happening down there." Through the battle raging around us, I watched Draven turn toward his sensor stations, demanding real-time analysis of Hector Prime's surface. What he saw broke the entity control completely. 12 million innocent civilians carving ritual symbols into their own city with their bare hands, their eyes glowing with the same golden light that had been shining from his own. "Emperor, preserve me," he whispered. "What have I done?" The golden glow faded from his eyes completely, replaced by the hollow stare of someone confronting the true scope of their unwilling complicity in cosmic horror. But the damage was already done. The ritual circles were nearly complete. The temporal locks were in place, and somewhere in the spaces between realities, entities older than human civilization were preparing to feed once again. "Marcus," I said urgently, "we can still stop this, but I need you to break the temporal locks around the Exterminatus authorization. Can you access the command codes?" He nodded shakily, his hands moving across control surfaces with the mechanical precision of someone operating on pure training, while their consciousness reeled from revelation. Temporal lock frequency identified. Beginning destabilization sequence. As Draven worked to undo the causality manipulation his own fleet had created, I turned my attention to the larger tactical situation. The battle was going in our favor. His escorts were falling back in disorder as the entity influence broke down across the fleet. But the real fight wasn't in space. It was on Hector Prime's surface, where 12 million souls continued their involuntary labor. "Siva," I called, "can we break the mass possession from orbit?" "Not without killing the people we're trying to save," she replied grimly. "The psychic link is too deeply integrated with their consciousness. Severing it suddenly would cause massive brain death." I felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling around me. Save 12 million souls by allowing them to complete the ritual that would doom billions more, or sacrifice them to prevent a cosmic horror from gaining another foothold in reality. "There might be another way," Chen Lin announced, his voice carrying a note of desperate hope. "The crystal fragments from Maltheus Prime. If we could establish a harmonic resonance with the ritual circles, we could overwrite the possession with something else," I finished, understanding immediately. Instead of carving symbols of hunger and consumption, they'd be guided to create patterns of protection and resistance. It was insanely dangerous, using the crystallized essence of 17 billion souls to directly counter entity manipulation on a planetary scale. The feedback could destroy my consciousness entirely, or worse, create a new form of possession that served different masters, but enslaved the population just as completely. "Do it," I decided. Better to risk my sanity than guarantee their damnation. I made my way to Watch Station Eternus's meditation chambers, where the crystal fragments from Maltheus Prime waited in their blessed reliquaries. As I placed my hands on the largest shard, I felt the familiar presence of 17 billion souls who had chosen love over fear in the face of certain death. "Help me," I whispered into the crystallized time. "Help me save them." The response was immediate and overwhelming, a harmonic frequency that resonated with love and sacrifice and fierce protective joy. I felt my consciousness expand across space to touch the minds of 12 million possessed civilians, offering them a different pattern to follow, a different purpose to serve. One by one, they stopped carving symbols of cosmic hunger and began creating new patterns, geometric forms that spoke of resistance and protection and the unbreakable human spirit. The ritual circles meant to summon entities became wards meant to banish them. The very symbols that would have anchored a feeding network became instruments of rejection and defiance. On Hector Prime's surface, the entity influence shattered like glass against the crystallized will of 17 billion souls who had faced extinction with love instead of fear. 12 million people collapsed as the possession broke, but they were free, their consciousness their own once again. "Temporal locks destabilized," Draven reported, his voice steady now that the entity influence was broken. "Exterminatus authorization codes purged from all systems. The fleet is standing down." Through Watch Station Eternus's sensors, I watched the psychic disturbances around Hector Prime fade to normal background levels. The planet was safe, its population free, and the entity network's attempted reconstruction had failed completely. But victory came with its own costs. I could feel the strain of channeling planetary-scale psychic intervention burning through my consciousness like acid. The crystal fragments from Maltheus Prime were dimming, their stored essence depleted by the effort of saving 12 million souls from cosmic possession. "Sir," Saver reported, "we're detecting similar patterns forming in the other target systems. Valyria Station and the Mordian shipyards are showing signs of mass possession events." I nodded wearily, already calculating travel times and resource allocations. The entity network had been stopped here, but other nodes were still active, other compromised inquisitors still following their predetermined scripts. The real war was far from over. "Signal the fleet," I commanded. "All ships prepare for immediate departure to the Valyria system, and get me a secure channel to Inquisitor Vex. He needs to know that the entity infiltration of the Inquisition goes deeper than we thought." As Watch Station Eternus's engines fired to life, carrying us toward our next confrontation with cosmic horror, I reflected on the path that had brought me here. 3 months ago, I'd been a simple psyker following orders and trying to survive. Now I commanded fleets and made decisions that affected the fate of entire star systems. The taste in my mouth had evolved again. No longer ash or clean water or complex responsibility or even hunter's instinct. Now it carried the weight of guardianship, the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness between stars, ancient hungers waited for any moment of weakness or doubt. But I also tasted something else. The crystallized essence of 17 billion souls who had faced extinction with love instead of fear, and 12 million people who had been freed from possession by that same sacrificial love. As long as that essence remained, as long as the human spirit could choose hope over despair in the face of cosmic horror, the entities would never truly win. The dream that had trapped me in endless repetition of Maltheus Prime's death was over. But the greater dream, the vision of humanity standing free from cosmic manipulation, protected by guardians who understood the price of vigilance, was just beginning. And I would see it through, no matter the cost. The real war had indeed begun, and we were ready.